Great pleasure, we are hosting our second ASA webinar to evaluate how our agri-food supply chains are coping during the COVID crisis, which is going on for 6 or 7 weeks now for many of us. COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented challenge to food production in Ireland and has most likely changed how all our members will do business into the future. We are encouraged that so many of you booked in to join us today, recognising that many moving parts in this unfolding pandemic and how it is affecting our sector. For those of you on the Twitter machine, perhaps link us with #ASA Ireland. Our panellists today represent the wide breadth of our industry, from dairy, beef to fresh horticultural produce. We are delighted to have our own horticultural sector represented today with Barbara Keatley, who is one of our own ASA members. Barbara is Retail Account Manager with Total Produce, and she has significant experience in managing supply chains in the fresh produce sector. Total Produce itself is the world #1 fresh produce supplier and is based in Dublin, with a key USB in nurturing supply chains around the globe. We also welcome Conor Mulvihill, Director of Dairy Industry Ireland, which is Ireland's largest indigenous industry affiliated to IBEC. Conor previously represented the cooperative sector in the European Parliament. We hope today he might be able to share some insights from the recently commissioned report on the effects of the COVID industry on the dairy sector. Finally, we have Cormac, Healy, who's Senior Director with Meat Industry Ireland, representing the meat processing sector, including beef, pork, lamb and poultry, and hope that he might give us a feel of how meat supply chains from farm to fork are being affected. Our panel today is being ably moderated by Ann-Marie Butler, Senior Agriculture Manager at Ulster Bank and current Vice President of the ASA. So over to you, Ann-Marie.
Many thanks, Seamus. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome. It's a lovely sunny morning here in Kilkenny, so I hope the sun is shining where you are. Again, I welcome our panellists. I thank them for their time. These certainly are testing times, but we remain positive. We remain resilient. We're a resilient sector and people by nature, and I think that will stand to us in good time. My children reminded me this morning that in time we will feature in the history books. So that certainly brought a smile to my face that we will be in history in time. So again, thank you all very much. And please feel free to post questions during our session this morning. There's Q&A there, you can post a question and we'll certainly hopefully get through all those questions. Barbara, if I can come to you first. So as Seamus said, Total Produce, you're operating out of over 30 countries. You're supplying over 300 lines of fresh produce. So that is a lot of movement of people and materials, keeping supply chains moving. And I like the line where you're supplying goods from the familiar to the truly exotic. So there's a lot of produce moving that I think maybe we all take for granted. So Barbara, you're very welcome. How are things in your industry, Barbara? How are things today? We're 6 weeks in. How are the things moving, or how are the people?
Well, thank you, Seamus, for your introduction as well. Our business covers off a lot of different sectors, obviously the wholesale, the food preparation sector, and most importantly the retail sector, and that's the sector I work in. Now at the minute, you can imagine the wholesale and food service is after plummeting, but the retail sector has really taken off, like sales in supermarkets. We cover most of the major retailers out of Swords and another site down the country. But sales have increased 20 to 30%, so that in itself is causing pressure across all supply chain. Again, like this, we also actually have a flour company in Ireland, and as you can imagine, the flowers are definitely suffering on the back of missing Mother's Day and Easter, where traditionally, obviously, people go and visit and will bring flowers, or but that's obviously in decline. Not only in Ireland, but in the Netherlands as well. Like the Netherlands would actually produce 70 or 80% of the bulbs sold worldwide, so they are really suffering. They see a decline of 60, 70% in their sector. So they've actually cleverly set up a program. They've called it #Buy Flowers, Not Toilet Paper. So really people have jumped on the bandwagon here, and a lot of companies are actually buying flowers for their staff members to keep the heart up in all businesses. And that alone has actually helped the sector slightly. Now, obviously, they've a long way to go, but it's some good news anyway. People, people can always help, I suppose, in any, small ways, help in a big way.
Yeah, well, it certainly shows, and I know you mentioned this to me earlier, and I looked up the hashtag, and if any of you get a chance later on, certainly have a look. It certainly has gathered great momentum, and I suppose it shows what can be achieved in moving some elements of products. Obviously, you mentioned there the way retailers have to respond. Consumers are changing their buying habits. Are there any particular products, Barbara, that are more problematic than others currently?
Yes, actually, because a lot of the sea freight, stuff coming from Southern Hemisphere countries could be on the water for a month. So a lot of that stock was coming anyway. So we are starting to see that all arrive now, and obviously further shipments coming. But air freighted products from this time of the year, you would be bringing in all your miniature veg, like your sugar snap, mange two, fine beans, all those on shelf. A lot of those would come from Kenya this time of the year and would mostly be air freighted. But obviously planes are not going. There is a limited amount going, not many people on them, but that air freight space, the cargo space underneath is costing a lot of money because it's in such high demand. So, okay, you're paying big money, but you might necessarily get the space as well. So, things you don't, I suppose, think about, planes are not flying, but that has a knock-on effect on the shelf, which you wouldn't really realise.
And I suppose it's quite interesting when you mentioned there, like some of the products are on a freight or on water for up to a month. So those were in transit, many of them before current restrictions. We will come back later on to the medium term, but is there a concern right now as you look for the next couple of weeks? Are some of those materials still on water coming towards us, or has there been a delay on the other side where things haven't got to set sail?
It actually isn't too bad. We thought it would be worse. Now Spain, obviously it's quicker turnaround. It's 5 days from Spain with product. But in regards to production out of Spain, they've managed to stay going. They're splitting their shifts according, like we all are. They've managed to keep production up to probably 80%. But like the likes of product coming from Southern Hemisphere, yes, it's still coming, but you have a delay in all docklands. So there's less staff. There's less admin staff, so clearing containers once they land is slower than normal. So that in itself can hold up another few days. And if you miss 2-3 days on shelf, you just don't get the sales back. Those sales are gone.
Okay, Barbara, we'll be back. That's most interesting. Thanks very much. Conor, if I move to you next, obviously, Conor, there's lots we will discuss and commission announcements last night. But I suppose, first of all, how are things on the ground with the dairy processing sector, Conor? How are things in your world?
Well, a lot better than we thought it would be about 4 weeks ago when the HSE projections were catastrophic, to be honest. And we genuinely feared that the absenteeism would drive a whole-scale shutdown of the processing sector, to be honest, Ann-Marie. As the COVID has developed, the government, along with staff and farmers, have been successful at flattening that curve. So our big danger now, we feel, is cluster breakouts in COVID. Number one, I suppose that's still happening, and we've seen examples in the United States of meat factories shutting down overnight because of a cluster outbreak. And the second one is a technical nature. It's very hard to get engineers if there's a mechanical breakdown to fix the spray dryers, etc., because a lot of them will be based out in the continent. So that's our other big fear at the moment. But overall, things are going quite well. Processing is going well thus far, but we're just about a week away from official peak. And the issue will never be stainless steel issue for us. There's €1.5 billion spent in the last 5 years in stainless steel in our industry. It'll always be a HR issue that will trip us up. So going well, but not out of the woods is the way I'd say it, Ann-Marie.
I know, and you had your report launched this week, Conor, commissioned by Ernst & Young. To be fair, there's some, I suppose, grim reading in it if things play as they may play. I know, to be fair, listening to you, maybe we're a little bit more positive, but I suppose some of the high-level figures, can be quite daunting for all of us. Dairy has an effect right across the economy, huge numbers of people employed. So what's your general sentiment after your report? Yeah,
so I suppose from our perspective, we felt that we've been business continuity planning. I know Cormac is as well, because we've been working together since January, and we thought this was a demand destruction incident in China. I think Barbara outlined that quite well. And little do we know, very rapidly it became an existential, once-in-a-century pandemic that we're facing with. So I suppose the CEOs of the dairy processors decided, from a lobbying perspective, it was pointless. DII asked for this, DII asked for that. We had to get third-party proof because, to be blunt, agriculture and government and the EU essentially only wanted us to keep food on shelves. Let's be blunt about that. And it was health was number one. But from the economic viability of our businesses and the supplier farmers, we were well down the list. So the only way we felt we could change the narrative on that was to get third-party proof, which is why we engaged Ernst & Young. On a positive perspective, it showed, and we have third-party evidence now, that the dairy industry is now worth €11.3 billion to the Irish national economy. It shows that we're 93% dependent on exports, which goes into Barbara's narrative, and I know I share that with Cormac as well in terms of what he would be saying. So they're the positives, but they mapped out scenario plans in price, what dairy prices would be in terms of cent per litre, 32 cent, 27 cent and 22 cent. And the demand destruction and the price destruction on those figures were absolutely frightening, even for us in industry. So I think the report was hugely effective in Brussels and government to say, look, this isn't Dairy Industry Ireland, this isn't the IFA, etc. This is Ernst & Young giving evidence around the need for supports to underpin the market. So yesterday's package was belated, I think was the benign word we used in our press release, but welcome. It's very hard to get 80 million at the moment in the teeth of a pandemic, but it's very little. It's very little. I think Fran McNulty used the phrase last night, a fly in the back of a cow's ass, or I think he was a bit nicer on RTE, and I felt that was apt, but we have to be positive about it. It does take, from a dairy perspective, 330,000 tonnes off the market for a period, which will be welcome to kind of underpin the market, but there's a lot more to come, Anne-Marie.
And I know from the media last night and the bits and pieces, like a quick sum indicates the support package is equivalent to maybe €8 per farmer in the EU. Now I'm always mindful of how these figures, once you do a basic sum like that, but looking down the line, Conor, and we'll come back to this and we'll be chatting to Cormac in similar veins. If we see some of the falls that are predicted, if the markets don't respond, I know there's been a little bit of positivity this week with a little bit of a lift in some of the skim and the butter prices. What armoury, if any, do the co-ops have to support price?
Yeah, well, okay, this is the perennial argument, and I suppose one thing I'd always, whenever I sit down with my colleagues in the farm organisations, and we have our ding-dong punch and duty battles over price, and DII is a trade association, we're not in charge of price, but I often explain it's in our interest to have high prices because we represent processors which are co-ops, PLCs and multinationals, yes, but if we're not making money, the farmer's not making money, and vice versa. We want higher prices. So that's number one. What's in the armoury? Of course, the co-op ethos is there in the armoury in terms of we will burn through balance sheets, but the issue is the scale of the crisis is so huge. The working capital needed to take that on is almost impossible. So yes, we could be paying a maximum milk price, but you're really only damaging your company in the long term. And the Ernst & Young report showed clearly that there is vulnerabilities there in the dairy processing system if supports didn't come on working capital. So we have a long way to go, and some of the recent narrative around the timings of the ending of COVID haven't been positive, even when Taoiseach and the Minister for Health. Yeah,
no, and certainly I suppose it has lengthened even this week, but just some of the commentary. And look, as I said, in the report you have, it's an additional 550 million in working capital. So, as you said, it's no small movement. Thanks, Conor. Cormac, again, along a similar vein, I suppose in general, thank you for your time. How are things in the meat processing world at the moment, or how are the actual lines?
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I suppose just firstly, to just take up on 2 points that Conor made, which I think are relevant. This crisis and this pandemic has shown the substance and the effectiveness of the food supply chain that we have. Certainly in the short term, As this goes on, we need to make sure that we don't undermine that supply chain, because there are impacts, there are damaging impacts right through from farm through the supply chain. And we need to keep talking about that. And I think that's something we're going to be talking about in the weeks and months ahead. It has stood up. Consumers have got food despite the panic and the surges and the panic buying at the beginning. I think that has all settled down now because consumers have seen that food is hitting the shelves. So we should be proud of that, but we should also make sure that this ongoing crisis doesn't undermine that, and there are risks on that, and that's a point that we've been making to both the department and the European Commission. The other point on processing, as Conor had touched on, the dairy processing. I mean, processing is continuing at meat plant level. We can touch on it in more detail later. There's a huge amount of effort gone in. It is heavily, human resource dependent. It's a labor intensive business, the business of meat processing, with lots of staff involved, and a huge amount of measures have had to be taken by plants to make sure that the confidence of staff, the awareness and the preventative and protection measures have been put in place to do that. But I suppose in a very quick overview across the meats, I mean, lamb, pigs and poultry are probably continuing by and large at in or around similar levels of throughput, if not a little bit higher in some of those. Beef has been the one that has been impacted on throughput, but that has been market driven rather than issues around processing capability. I suppose to go back to your question, Anne-Marie, of kind of a sense of where things are at. I mean, this has, it's impacting us right throughout the chain, farm, factory level, and in the market. And I think what's really, I mean, unprecedented about this particular crisis or pandemic now is the speed at which it started to impact as a market impact. I mean, it was really fast in terms of the impact. And then the scale or reach of it right across, global markets. I mean, right throughout UK and the EU, but also we see the same impacts in the US market. I suppose the big issue, as Barbara touched on at the beginning as well, is the food service sector. That's the real market impact at this point in time. The loss of the food service market almost overnight, right across, I mean, obviously domestically, but right across the UK and Europe. I suppose we saw it first as the virus itself started to play out, and we saw on the news channels here in Europe. Italy was the first market to be really impacted and to see deliveries being cancelled and that. But that quickly spread across Spain, France, Germany, and obviously then at home here as the restrictions cut in, and equally in the UK. And we continue to live with that at the minute, that shutdown of food service. It has particularly, as you know, impacted on beef for the simple reason, I suppose, that one, more than 30% of overall beef from Ireland is going that food service route and of total volume. But then when you look at the type of products that are impacted, the steaks in particular, as you've heard much coverage on, are the ones that would principally be destined for many of the food service channels. And we estimate that something in the region of 60% of our overall steak exports are going that food service route. And then the other side of the food service market is the quick serve and the burger chains, they've equally been impacted and closed. And that has impacted to on some of the four-quarter cuts as well in terms of supply there. So I mean, it's been pretty sharp in terms of speed of impact and the scale of it. I think most impacted of the sectors across the meat sectors at the moment is beef, obviously, and that has resulted in both price pressure at in terms of the finished price the farmer is getting, and also in terms of throughput. I mean, we estimate that throughput now, in terms of cattle processed per week, is probably down about 30% from where we were the week or two before COVID restrictions started to come in.
And I suppose with maybe with my banker's hat on, Cormac, like certainly we are seeing, obviously, you know, where there's been challenges where people can't move animals, where some are more reliant maybe on the mart than others, and as to the throughput. But, and you mentioned it there earlier, in undermining the entire chain long term for all sectors. But should the industry be worried that the primary producer will only be able to carry so much, you know, based on how the market is responding? Like, you know, the consumer is not buying the high value cuts. Is there anything that can be done? I know Borbia have lots of ads now to try and encourage more to buy the steaks and maybe cook more steaks at home. Can something be done there to promote the sale of, or is it only the tip of the iceberg, really, Cormac, when you look at what we've lost?
Well, you have to try everything, Anne-Marie, and you're right. I mean, what we're really struggling on is steaks, and they account for a big part of the overall value of each animal. So we have a real imbalance in the carcass at the moment. I mean, the high value steak cuts not moving, and you know, at retail level, while the spikes and surges have stabilized now, as I mentioned, and the retail sales level has stabilized at a higher level, but it is still more concentrated on that minced and diced and lower value product. And yeah, we have to try to everything to try and push more steak sales through retail, because I think, unfortunately, as you look ahead, you know, the lifting of restrictions, and everyone is starting to talk about how you kind of reopen and reboot the economy overall. And for us, it'll be what can you do to get food service open? It's going to take a number of months yet, I think, before we see a food service sector fully operational. I think everybody sees and realizes that as restrictions are phased out, you know, the pubs, the restaurants are going to be impacted. So we have to push and work with retailers, not just in Ireland, but in the UK and across the continent, to try to get more steaks through there, more promotions. We've called on the Commission to try and get behind promoting steak. But you also have to remember that consumers are in a major phase of uncertainty as well, and many of them unemployed or without a job at the moment. So their willingness or their confidence in spending more on higher value cuts is going to be a problem as well.
It's challenged, yeah, exactly. Cormac, again, following from the Commission's announcement last night, what's your sentiment towards the announcement?
Yeah, our sentiment, as we expressed last night, was that while it's important that the Commission has eventually come onto the pitch, if you like, and engaged on the crisis that is across agriculture in the EU, the measures they've come up with fall well short of providing any meaningful support in the meat sector, and in particular in the beef sector. I mean, overall, 80 million across the entire EU agriculture sector, across all individual sectors, is a minuscule amount of funding. I accept, you know, funding isn't easy to come by, and there are the issues that is this impact of COVID is not just in agriculture; it's right across many economic sectors. But nevertheless, the kind of support that has come through as of yet falls well short of providing any meaningful support. APS is the mechanism that they have announced. It's not one that it's not one that has been used for many years in the meat sector. Maybe Conor will talk more to it. On the dairy sector, it has been used more. But it's the challenge for us is that you're storing and freezing down steak cuts that are you know, going to lose a lot of value by that freezing down, and the level of aid that they have talked about falls well short of the kind of market impact that has taken place.
Okay, Barbara, if I could come back to you, and I suppose it's been touched on there with Cormac in how consumers have changed the behaviours and will have to because of income constraints. From your side, Barbara, have the habits of the consumer changed when we're out shopping now?
Oh, absolutely. Like as Cormac said, the premium lines, like the steak lines, at the end of the day, people essentially will go back on what they can afford at that time. So like examples, during a recession on any of the organic veg lines, fruit lines, you will always see a decline because you are paying the premium. So people will revert to the promotional lines, the value lines. But overall, baskets have changed really because people are gone back to scratch cooking now. Like all our processed lines, prepared veg, stir-fry kits, they're all in decline, whereas people are gone back to the traditional dinners, the parsnips, the carrots and broccoli, etc. And people are scratch cooking. So that has definitely changed. Brought up the sales on that end to obviously counteract the loss of sales on the prep. But also people are actually, they are shopping less, but bigger spends. Kantar release the report every month. Now April obviously isn't out yet, it'll be out by the 1st or 2nd of the next month. So they will show a massive increase across all sectors, I presume. On fresh produce alone, you're talking about 25-30% increase. Where people are actually, their mindset have changed. Their shop has to last them longer, so they are actually looking for longer life products to buy. So such lines of, apples, longer shelf life products will sell better. They're increased, whereas soft fruit lines that have only 2 to 3 days on them, they have decreased because of that. Because people just are not going to shop, maybe every week in 10 days. So the product has to last in the fridge, really.
Yeah, and as I said, people are trying to stay home, and yet watching programs like last night, it's have your list, don't go that often. And I suppose that's the advice that's been given to people, which is what people are hopefully doing. But as I said, it has a direct effect then on what's being bought and how it's been bought. Conor, we can see the challenges that are there. Do we take some comfort from optimism in China and Asia? Does that offer some, or is it too early to have that level of optimism?
Yeah, I suppose in preparation for this, I was talking to some of the Board BA contacts we have out there. In fairness, Board BA have well-resourced both Chinese and Southeast Asia offices. So China, there is green shoots, there's no doubt about it, but we're well down. And I suppose the point that was made there, and I think Barbara said, it's demand forsaken that we've lost as well. It's not going to be pent-up demand coming back. We've really lost Q1 and Q2 of a key global engine of not just dairy demand but food demand around the world. But there are green shoots there, and certainly we're holding on to them and looking at any opportunities. The percentage I got that China was kind of back up to about 76-77% of where it maybe should be at the moment. Then around the Southeast Asian rim, I'm afraid the story wasn't as positive at all. We've heard a lot of kind of good stories about the likes of Singapore, South Korea, those type of places. They're now experiencing what has been kind of come into the Irish narrative now about the second wave. This has now come into our own government's kind of narrative about the second wave, and that's really kind of made lockdowns actually come back on their agenda when we felt that they were kind of maybe a month ahead of us, 6 weeks ahead of us. So it's a kind of a tale of two stories. But yeah, like any green shoot, we're holding on to it as an industry as well, but it's very mixed out there as of yet. And the other thing that I suppose my CEOs would kind of be very cognizant out of is our own kind of export backyard for the commodity product that we usually export over peak, particularly because obviously we're coming into dairy peak, and that's in North Africa and the Middle East. And apart from Iran, the virus still has to bite there yet, and particularly around the supply chain, which I suppose is the theme of this kind of call, they're finding real struggles to get containers, both chilled and ambient, out to the likes of Algeria, Iraq, etc. But then again, there is some green shoots there. Algeria, for example, does a public tender called O'Neill. They actually, the results of that were, for skim, the results of that were a little bit better than we expected. But the continued decline of oil is going to impact them, because a lot of those economies pay for their food, and particularly the commodity food, for oil. And we've all been reading the stories that the Americans are essentially paying you to take oil at the moment. So look, it's up and down, so we're watching everything.
And I know that recent Nielsen research was suggesting that, you know, consumers will change their habits. You know, and it's probably early days for that. But when you mentioned the refrigerated containers, it's something that's going to touch on later, but I suppose, can you give us a flavour, Conor, and Cormac or Barbara can comment on this also. How scarce are containers at the moment, or where are the containers caught?
Yeah, so supply chains have essentially been shredded. Like, you're having a kind of ripple effect in terms of ports being closed in China at the start of the year. So all those containers are delayed coming back. And on our geographical location on the periphery of Europe means we're the last economy to be getting those containers, even when they're coming back across Europe. So the hind udder I think we're on, I think, is to put in an agrarian colloquial, just because of our geographical perspective. And to quote one of my CEOs, they can't be got for love nor money at the moment. But hopefully those things work themselves out as time goes on. And it very much feeds into what Barbara maybe might have outlined there in terms of for air freight, etc. Maybe going back to your question around, let's say, opportunities for Ireland in terms of the product mix changes that you're chatting about there, Anne-Marie. It's not a good story there for us either, because we have a bit like our colleagues in meat, because of the kind of profile of production in Irish dairy. We actually produce mostly for food service ingredient type markets. Consumer markets, bar the Kerrygold brand being an obvious exception, are big, but they're a fraction of what they would be in other dairy economies such as Germany and France, who have huge domestic markets which they can switch their baskets around to as well. So look, we're trying to adapt to that, but when you have walls of milk coming out, you're really looking at commodity products like your skim, your cheddar, your butter being your mainstay.
Okay, keep it moving.
Yeah, I mean, just to come in on the question around containers, was firstly start with China. I mean, we have seen the market free up, you know, as it came out of COVID. As Conor said, ports have now started to move again since a number of weeks ago. And you've seen, you know, product that was sitting quayside for a long time start to move into the market, and hopefully that will bring with it a kind of a renewed demand for some product. The container issue is you know, largely concerned with that kind of lockup of containers that there had been for a number of months, I suppose, in China, and the delay in those, you know, being emptied and coming back up to this side of the world. And as Conor has said, it is a case, I mean, they are starting to move and come back from Asia into the Central European ports, but we still feel that we are not getting in Ireland, because as Conor said, we're on the periphery, we're not getting our fair share, if you like, of those containers. And speaking to exporters, I mean, they're still running at probably at this point 70-80% of what they would require in terms of containers, and the costs have probably doubled in the last 12 months on container freight. On the other side of logistics, more closer to home around Europe and in the context of COVID, I know it's something we spoke about. You know, it has held up remarkably well, number one. I mean, in terms of most of our meat exports to the continent or to the UK are roll on, roll off trucks on the ferry routes. It has moved. There were some concerns at the beginning of delays and border checks and new documentation required by drivers, you know, entering France and that. But all of that seems to have settled quite a bit. I think the Commission did step in, talked about and developed green lanes to keep essential goods moving. And that, by and large, I think has worked. We're not hearing major issues. One of the concerns that has been raised around that logistics piece has been that, you know, traditionally the truck that would bring a container of meat to France or Germany or Italy would be getting a backload. It might not be food, it could be dry goods, it could be anything. because of the shutdown in the economies everywhere and the shutdown here, they're struggling to get those backloads. And that means, on the one hand, you get a truck goes over, generally it would be coming back within a day or so, having picked up its truckload. Now it may be waiting for a bit longer. So that's increasing the cost for the haulage companies, or they may fail to get a load, and it has an impact on the cost of that. So that's one of the issues there at the moment. On the
challenges that are there. Thank you to those that are submitting questions. If people have questions, please do pop them up there. A question, Cormac, for yourself that just maybe comes back on our earlier discussions. If food service reopened in other countries, such as we're potentially hearing in Denmark or Austria or some other southern hemisphere countries, have the meat companies or the likes of Bord Bia, are we in a position to resource these countries?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, in any country you're dealing with, you're going to have your clients that have been closed down. If there's any prospect of reopening, firstly, companies and exporters and processors are going to be engaged with them closely to get back in there, as I believe will Bord Bia. Denmark, Austria probably wouldn't be the strongest, markets for us, but certainly Denmark takes some product. But yeah, every people will be jumping on every effort, Anne-Marie, to get back in there as restrictions are lifted. The challenge, I suppose, we have is that we are the major importer, or the major, whichever way you look at it, the major exporter into these markets, and their own domestic markets have suffered the same issue, in terms of impact of food service, and they're going to be, they're going to be equally competing strongly. And it's one of the things that we've seen in some of the European markets. Obviously, there's been some improvements and lift in the volume of product going into retail, but largely it's displaced food service product that might be going in there from domestically as well. But that's a challenge. But no, we will and have to be on top of every opportunity, be it as across Europe or as China starts to free up and demand comes again.
And I suppose another one, Cormac, and it was on my radar, obviously Supermax announced their reopenment in parts of the country with drive-through and suitable facilities. Any idea how much volume of the fourth quarter cuts that would take? And then any sign of McDonald's resuming, or is it too early to comment there?
Yeah, I think there have been some signals out there of some of the quick serve restaurants, the burger chains, looking at, some of them in some markets try to keep their drive-through or delivery going, and it is accounted for, maybe 25% of business, I would say, maybe, or it helped them to maintain that, and everything that moves in that direction, every small opening will take some pressure off. The McDonald's are one of the largest buyers of Irish meat, so if they can start to move again in terms of their branches and their stores around the UK and Ireland, that would certainly be a help. And same true for Supermax or Burger Kings or any of those stores. Is every little bit, is going to be some more demand and some more life back into that food service channel.
Yeah, very good. Barbara, if I just come back to you, so obviously, as we said at the start, we are very fortunate. There's food on shelves, there's great variety, great supply. I know the chief economist with the FAO this week put out a report warning of, potentially famine in parts of the world where there won't be supplies. When we bring it a little bit closer to home, there's obviously a lot in the media this week about labour and getting labour onto farms and harvesting that fruit. North County Dublin, I'm conscious at the minute, has a lot growing. So you might just give us a little flavour of what Ireland is looking into over the summer months as we try to harvest our crops.
Yeah, well, luckily, by us moving into Irish at the minute, a lot of our salad lines, Irish will be starting. On the veg lines, it's mostly Irish, all year round, but you'll have a gap between old season and new season veg lines. But what's happening at the minute in regards to staff? So all the growers are okay at the minute with their wave 1 staff, because they are staff that kind of maintain all winter to upkeep the plant husbandry, but wave 2 will be an issue. The berries have started already. You've obviously seen that issue, but again, our broccoli mass production will start ramp up in mid-June onwards, and those that could be a real issue. Now, I think the government have the Department of Ag are working with the Department of Employment Affairs, and they are trying to come up with a recruitment drive for the horticulture sector, because there's thousands of staff needed. Now, those staff come back every year from Bulgaria, Romania, Poland. They are repeat staff, and they are skilled staff in a way, because a lot of the work they're doing, it is hard work, but it is trained work. It takes a good few weeks to get somebody up and going on what to do properly. So great if we can get a lot of Irish people employed in it, but it is tough work, and hopefully this will work and the recruitment drive will work, because otherwise we will have problems within a month or so, definitely.
Okay, and I suppose for the medium term impact on the sector, Barbara, I suppose as you look out for your product coming in, I suppose medium term, there's a cautious optimism, is there?
I think the product will be there because it's obviously grown. Now, obviously, the product that is grown, those programs aren't necessarily matching demand at the minute, because demand has increased so much. But product is there. The issue will be to get the seasonal workers in to harvest the crop, really. So, look, it's unknown yet, really. We may wait and see. It's just the berries start now, so they're obviously the earlier crop. But all the field veg crops now will kick off in about a month, and there is definite concern around that, what we're going to do.
Okay, I suppose, and it comes back to the point made by Cormac earlier, I suppose about our role as a sector and our role in the economy, and the role of government in making sure that all those chains remain, because I think maybe there is a level of complacency when we go to supermarkets and shops. The shelves are full in large, so it's making sure that is not taken for granted. Conor, a question in, and I think you'll need your crystal ball for this one, but is there a view on how low milk price could go, more so to be alert for, I suppose, people overspending, or for the farmers? I suppose it's battening down the hatches in some ways.
Well, it is. Let's say skim at the moment, which is our staple product during peak, is at a rate of €1,750 a tonne at the moment. That's a see-through milk price of the region of 20 cents a litre, Anne-Marie. Butter is well down. You're talking about a see-through milk price, just mental calculation there, about 23.5 cents a litre. Cheddar, which is the third Irish staple, has held up pretty well until maybe this week, probably driven by those the consumer demand and the retail demand that Barbara and Cormac would have alluded to. So I suppose the way I'd put it, there's an anvil on the back of milk price at the moment, and we're trying to grab any positive threads in the wind, as you would probably even heard in terms of what's happening elsewhere. So, and like, let's say the processors and co-ops are in a totally invidious position, because if you keep paying way more than what you're getting in on your sales of commodities, you'll absolutely destroy your own business. And let's say going forward, in terms of those points that you'd make in terms of trying to get into the higher value markets, and when recovery does come, you won't have a business left. That's the problem. So it's going to be a hugely delicate balancing act over the next couple of months, and we will be very cognizant this is farmers' peak as well, peak check months, where they're paying for their feed bills, their fertilizer bills, their veterinary bills. So you can be damn sure every business is aware of that, and a lot of them have farmer board members running it at setting prices. So the crystal ball, as we said, we don't want to talk down the milk price. We're very conscious of it. But we have done a scenario plan. Well, EY did at 22 cents a litre. So that's one of the reasons why we were screaming at government in the EU to get those supports, get those working capital supports, get those PSA supports, so that we don't go down to intervention level prices, which effectively locks in those losses.
Okay. And I suppose just a very quick one, Conor, have we a sense of what percentage of producers might have milk forward, fixed price at more comfortable levels?
Yeah, well, I think it's a huge lesson already for both processors and farmers that we really need to rethink our attitude around forward price contracts for milk and for mutual funds. We would estimate at the moment that about 30 to 35% of Irish milk is now locked in forward contracts, mostly back-to-backs. So I would think this, one of the big lessons, and we would be a huge advocate as an association in the last number of years, that we really need to rethink our relationship with mutuals and forward contracts to buffer from shocks like this.
Okay, I'm getting my warning lights that we're running close on time. Just one or two very quick questions that are there, just to be fair to those who put them in. Cormac, this might be a question or a comment. Is it time, and this came in, is it time that we should be looking to see if we can do anything again with the likes of Russia? Now, I'm not sure if that's within your remit, but more a question or comment that these are markets that maybe we need to be getting back to.
Hi, Ann-Marie.
Oh, hi, Conor.
Cormac.
Yeah, Cormac. So I don't know, it's a question it's a question or comment. I'm not sure that an answer to it as such, but if the opportunity, is it time we started reviewing and heading back to markets where, reviewing fast-growing Russian markets?
Well, we have no access there. Going back to the political embargo that was brought in a number of years ago. So, I mean, we have to chase after every market, and we have market priorities in Asia, and improving the actual list of products that we can get into markets like China, and we're working on access to South Korea and those kind of growth markets. We continue to have a political embargo between, on European product going into Russia. So, and in the meantime, they have, developed their pig production. They've developed our poultry production. So I'm not sure that it's necessary. Well, it isn't the target market at this point in time for us. I mean, we concentrate on the growth markets in Asia, I think.
Okay, very good. Look, I'm conscious of time. We might just go around for any final comments. I know there's a couple of questions there that we just won't get to, which maybe we will get people's opinion and come back to people on email, just in relation there to crop insurance. There is a question about, maybe Barbara, are we looking at where crops might not get harvested, as happened in the US? I suppose you touched on that earlier, that we're not there yet, but obviously we're mindful of where crops are heading in the general sense.
Yeah, I don't think I hope we won't get to that, because there are, example, Poland, they're talking about reopening airports in the start of June. So if they do, if we can't get Irish staff to work, we'll obviously have to go back to because these staff, as I said, come back every year. They will maybe come over for 6 months seasonal work, go home for 6 months. So again, look, we hope it won't get to that and we won't be dumping crop. But we can also revert back to more loose product. So on your shelf, you obviously have a lot of pre-packed products, but worst case scenario, we can revert back to the olden days, all loose on the shelf. So you won't have, at least, you can at least eliminate the pack out staff. You will only need the staff in the field, and they will pack into crates at that stage. And that's the worst case scenario, but hopefully we won't end up dumping crops.
No bother. Conor, any final remarks or comments or?
Yeah, I tried to end on two positive notes. Number one, like in terms of where we were when we were doing our business continuity planning in January and February, we're on the upper end of what we could expect. I know there's a huge issue in prices, but in terms of the functioning and that doomsday scenario of dumping milk, which was a clear and present danger for us, we're in a good place. We're not out of the woods, as I said. So that, number one, that is good. And supply chains with difficulties are working. Irish product is being sold. We're going to be dealing with our biggest ever record dairy peak of 255 million litres of milk a week, and we will handle it with the help of God, because of the staff and the farmers and the whole chain working well. The second one I would just maybe leave people with is there's going to be a new respect for food and food supply chains after this. And I think we should start thinking now as a kind of industry of how we capitalise on it, and that it doesn't kind of rescind back into kind of the subconscious of people, and they take us for granted as an issue. Like, obviously I'd be active in social media, and the usual attacks I would get from vegans and environmentalists, they're very subdued now these days in comparison to normal times. So just leave with those two positive comments.
No bother. Thank you, Conor. Cormac, any concluding remarks?
Well, I think overall, I mean, for most of the food sector and agriculture, we are highly dependent on getting the food service open again, and how soon that happens is going to be important. We have concerns that it is going to be at the latter end of the de-restriction and the lifting of restrictions by governments across Europe and the world. But that's going to be fundamental to kind of recovery. I started by talking about, and Conor has finished on it there, I think it is the key point. I started by saying that our supply chain, our food supply chain, has shown to be, a supply chain of substance, from farmers right through to processors and hauliers and all those service providers that work and support the food chain. We continue to keep processing moving, and every effort will be made there. But we can't lose sight that if ongoing damage is done by the impact of this on markets and on returns right the way back to primary producer, then we're going to undermine those supply chains. So it's important in the context of immediate supports that are brought to bear, but also I think in the context of the CAP budget and funding debate that's going to resume in the months ahead, that we actually learn from this and don't allow our supply chains to be undermined, that have worked so well thus far. Don't allow them to be undermined for the future.
Exactly. I suppose it was Winston Churchill, was it? Don't let a good crisis go to waste. So Barbara, final comments or summation?
Well, just to reiterate what the guys said, really, the provenance is key within our sector anyway. We're luckily coming into Irish season, so it is helping us to alleviate the transport issue, because all North County Dublin, where we're based, is full of growers, and we really need to sing that, really, the importance of the Irish grower. And those growers are in decline, and we just have to stop that happening any further, really.
Yeah, very good. Well, look, I see Seamus is back, so lads, just from my side, I'd sincerely like to thank Barbara, Conor and Cormac for, I suppose, their time first of all, but their honesty and insight. We very much appreciate it. I thank them, and I thank everyone for the questions, and I'll just hand back to you now, Seamus.
Hi, I'd like to thank Anne-Marie for her facilitating the session with empathy and knowledge. I suppose some of the insights today are captured on our ASA Twitter handle, and there's a lot of stuff from this meeting. I'd like to commend our panelists on behalf of the ASA for their open and informative discourse and their tireless work to keep their respective sectors open for business. I suppose that's why the discussion is so relevant for many of our members on the line, who are all in the same boat. I think we can all relate to Barbara's observation on scratch cooking, bigger and more thoughtful shop spends, Conor's observation on our exports being paid for in oil and low demand at the moment, and Cormac's note on green names for food exports and the lockup of container supply chains affecting supply chains in general. So to wrap up, we're a member-centric organisation, and we're without our natural home of networking events. So please feel free to pick up the phone to Barbara in our office, any of our council members, or connect with us online if you have any feedback on this event or ideas for future ones. So with that, thank you, stay safe, buy flowers and Irish produce, and goodbye for now.